Have you ever met someone who seemed too perfect? So perfect that it felt off? What if that meeting led to something you couldn't explain? Something you wish you could forget? I grew up in Vermont, and in my early 20s I lived just outside of Burlington. It was a turbulent time in my life. I'd just ended a long-term relationship and was trying to piece myself together, wandering through life without much direction. My grandmother, a devout Catholic, became a central figure during this time. After my grandfather's passing, a man admired and deeply rooted in our community, she never missed a Sunday at Mass. I began attending church with her, partly for her sake and partly because I felt unmoored, craving stability. Her unwavering faith was something I couldn't fully understand, but admired deeply. She believed my grandfather was at peace with God, and that belief seemed to comfort her in ways I couldn't replicate. One Sunday, everything shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. As the congregation rose for the final hymn, my eyes caught on a girl sitting a few pews ahead. She wasn't singing, wasn't holding a hymnal. She just sat there, her head slightly tilted, her gaze fixed on some point far beyond the church walls. Something about her seemed off, not in a threatening way, but as though she didn't quite belong in that place. The contrast was stark. Among the familiar faces of my small, tight-knit community, hers was entirely unfamiliar, like a stranger who had wandered into a story already in progress. Yet despite the sense of dissonance, I couldn't tear my eyes away. She had thick dark hair that tumbled over her shoulders and striking amber eyes that seemed to shimmer, even in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. It wasn't just her appearance that held me captive. It was an almost magnetic pull, an inexplicable need to learn more about her. But as I watched, I couldn't shake the nagging doubt creeping into my mind. Why had I never seen her before? In a community this small, new faces were rare, and yet here she was, as if she had materialized out of thin air. After the service ended, I hesitated, torn between curiosity and an unspoken sense of caution. Finally, I mustered the courage to approach her. Up close, she radiated an aura of quiet confidence, mixed with an air of mystery that made it hard to look away. Her name was Lila, she told me, her voice soft but steady. She explained that her family had recently moved to the area and that she was attending a university nearby. Her words felt rehearsed, as if she'd said them 100 times before, and something about the way she avoided eye contact during her explanation made me wonder if she was telling the whole truth. Still, our conversation flowed effortlessly, an easy rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. She laughed at my jokes, her smile lighting up her face, but there was a guardedness in her answers, a carefulness in how she spoke. It was as though she was revealing just enough to keep me intrigued, but holding back something important. By the end of our chat, I had her number scribbled on a piece of paper, my heart racing with an unfamiliar excitement. I left the church feeling lighter than I had in months, yet in the back of my mind that small seed of doubt remained. Who was Lila really? And why did she feel so out of place? Over the next week, Lila and I texted constantly. Her social media was sparse, almost unnervingly so, but I brushed it off. She gradually opened up about her troubled family life, an abusive stepfather and a biological father she wouldn't even discuss. It seemed like she had fled something far darker than she let on. When Sunday rolled around, I hoped to see her at church again. She was there, and I asked her out. Her immediate yes was accompanied by a soft smile that left me both excited and nervous. We kept our plans simple, dinner and a drive. The evening went smoothly, her company easy and enjoyable. After dinner, I suggested a drive down a quiet highway. The road was lined with towering trees, their silhouettes casting eerie shadows under the moonlight. And then, everything unrevealed. As we continued driving down the dimly lit highway, the conversation had started to lull into a comfortable silence. Out of nowhere, Lila began muttering softly under her breath. At first, I thought she was humming, or perhaps talking to herself, but the rhythm of her words was odd, unfamiliar. It wasn't English, nor was it any language I could identify. The tone of her voice shifted, growing deeper and more guttural with each passing second, as if something primal was surfacing from within her. My stomach tightened, and my grip on the steering wheel grew white-knuckled as an icy dread crept through me. Then it happened. Her eyes. They rolled back into her head, leaving only the stark whites visible, a sight so unnatural it made my breath catch in my throat. My heart began pounding as adrenaline surged through my veins. My mind raced, searching for some rational explanation, but none came. The car swerved slightly, veering dangerously close to the edge of the road. Panicked, I yanked the wheel back, narrowly avoiding the ditch that loomed just feet away. Glancing over at Lila, I was struck by the sheer strangeness of her appearance. Her head tilted at an odd, almost inhuman angle, and her body seemed unnaturally stiff, as though frozen in some unexplainable state. She didn't seem like herself anymore. She looked like someone or something entirely different. Her muttering had morphed into a low, continuous hum, eerie and dissonant, like the faint echo of a chant carried from somewhere far away. It was a sound that made my skin crawl, reverberating in a way that felt otherworldly. Fighting the overwhelming urge to flee, I pulled the car over to the shoulder of the road, my hands trembling so violently that I struggled to steady the wheel. I turned to her, my voice shaking as I called her name, desperate to break through whatever spell seemed to have overtaken her. "Lila," I said, louder this time. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" But she didn't respond. Her head twitched slightly, her face void of any expression, and her voice continued that haunting drone, as if she were somewhere far beyond my reach. Then, as suddenly as the nightmare began, it ceased. Her eyes, which moments ago had been rolled back to expose only the ghastly whites, snapped back into place. But the expression she fixed on me was anything but normal. It was wild, feral, her pupils dilated to inky voids, her lips slightly parted as though caught mid-snarl. It wasn't just panic or fear on her face. It was something primal, something that didn't belong to her, or to any human being. My breath caught in my throat, and my hands clutched the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. Before I could even think of what to say, she moved with an unnatural quickness. Her hand shot to the door handle, and she flung the car door open so violently that it rebounded against its hinges. Without a single word or glance back, she bolted into the dense, shadow-drenched forest, her figure quickly swallowed by the darkness. The sound of her footsteps on the underbrush faded, as though the night itself was consuming her. I sat there, paralyzed. My mind reeled with questions that collided and tangled in a mess of fear and confusion. Should I chase after her? What if she was hurt? Or worse? But then a far darker thought gripped me. What if she wasn't running from something? What if she was running to it? My instincts screamed at me to stay put, to lock the doors and remain in the safety of the car, such as it was. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours, the stillness of the night pressing down on me. The forest seemed alive with shadows that danced and flickered just beyond the reach of my headlights. My shaking hands fumbled for my phone, and I finally managed to dial 911. "There's been an incident," I stammered, my voice trembling as I struggled to find the right words. "A woman, she ran into the woods after acting strange." The dispatcher's calm tone felt alien against the chaos in my head. As I tried to explain, the forest loomed before me, silent and unyielding, as if mocking my inability to understand what had just unfolded. I gave them my location and hung up, but the uneasy quiet that followed was deafening. I couldn't shake the feeling that by the time help arrived, it would already be too late, not just for her, but perhaps for me as well. The authorities arrived and took my statement, though I could tell they thought I was either crazy or hiding something. They searched the woods but found nothing. I never saw Lila again. Her number was disconnected, her social media wiped clean, and no one at church remembered seeing her. It was as if she'd never existed. Months later, as I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, the shadows stretching long across the walls, I found myself aimlessly scrolling through local news articles. The mundanity of the headlines, car crashes, petty crimes, political disputes, blurred together until a photograph caught my eye. My breath hitched. There, staring back at me from the grainy image, was a face I recognized immediately. Her dark curls, those piercing amber eyes. It was Lila. My heart started to pound as my eyes darted to the headline, "Local Mystery, Search for Missing Girl Cold After 5 Years." The article described her in chilling detail. Her name wasn't Lila, it was Anna. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, last seen leaving her college dorm late one autumn evening. Friends described her as bright but reserved, someone who didn't let people get too close. Her family had pleaded for information, but the case had gone cold. the authorities left with nothing but dead ends. As I read on, a creeping unease settled over me. The accompanying photo, though older, was unmistakably her. The same delicate features, the same enigmatic expression. But then I saw the date. My blood turned to ice. She had vanished 5 years before the night I met her. 5 years. My mind rebelled against the impossibility of it, trying to rationalize the connection. Was it a coincidence? A relative who looked eerily similar? But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. It was her, there was no doubt in my mind. The article described rumors surrounding her disappearance. Some said she had run away to escape an abusive home, while others whispered of something darker, something almost supernatural. A chilling detail buried near the end of the piece made my skin crawl. Her friends had reported strange behavior leading up to her disappearance. She'd started speaking in foreign tongues, scribbling strange symbols in her notebooks, and claiming she felt watched by something she couldn't see. I shut my laptop abruptly, the echo of the lid snapping shut, breaking the oppressive silence in my apartment. My hands trembled as I tried to process what I had just read. It wasn't just the realization that I had spent time with a girl who had been declared missing half a decade earlier. It was the gnawing fear that whatever had happened to her before was not over. Had I unknowingly crossed paths with something far darker than I could comprehend? I didn't sleep that night, haunted by her face and the uncanny feeling that I hadn't seen the last of her. Have you ever felt like someone, or something, was watching you, even when you were completely alone? What if the answer was closer than you thought, hidden in the dark? My family owns this clunky 2010 Subaru Outback that's practically falling apart. Despite the endless problems, faulty brakes, a cranky engine, and electronics that flicker like Christmas lights, it stubbornly refuses to die. My parents keep joking that they're just waiting for it to break down entirely to justify buying a new car. Until then, I'm stuck driving it, which is basically a rolling disaster. The worst part, the windshield wipers don't work. In the rain, it's like staring at a wall of water. Luckily, I live in Arizona, where rain is rare, so it hasn't been much of an issue until one unforgettable night. It was a few summers ago. I just finished visiting my childhood friend Marcus in Colorado. It had been years since we'd seen each other, so I decided to make the trip solo, turning the long desert drive into a mini-adventure. The way there was fantastic. Marcus and I stayed up late reminiscing, and I left feeling glad I'd made the effort. The drive back started out uneventfully, the open road stretching ahead as I left my friend's place. But the tranquility didn't last long. Just as I crossed into Arizona, the sky seemed to split open. A massive storm rolled in without warning, lightning cracking across the heavens in jagged streaks, and thunder rumbling so deeply it seemed to shake the car. Torrents of rain began to fall, thick sheets of water hammering against the windshield with such force that visibility dropped to almost nothing. My heart sank as I remembered the one glaring flaw of this battered old car. The windshield wipers didn't work. Any amount of rain was a death sentence, and this was no ordinary drizzle. I had no choice but to pull over. Carefully, I guided the car off the highway and into the desert, parking as far away from the road as I could to avoid any passing trucks that might not see me. The rain was relentless, drumming on the roof with a ferocity that felt almost personal, as if the storm itself was intent on keeping me trapped. At first I thought it would only be a short delay. Storms pass, after all. But as the minutes stretched into an hour and the deluge showed no signs of letting up, I realized I might be stuck for far longer than I had anticipated. Calling for help crossed my mind, but I dismissed the thought just as quickly. Money was tight, and the last thing I needed was to deal with a ticket or the hassle of involving my parents, who were hours away. Besides, I told myself, it's just rain. I can wait it out. But waiting brought its own problems. As I sat there alone in the car, the isolation began to press down on me. The storm's unyielding fury was matched by the growing darkness outside, the sun dipping lower and lower until the desert was bathed in a strange, dim twilight. The emptiness around me seemed to grow larger, more oppressive. I tried to distract myself, but an unshakable feeling of unease began to creep in. Then came the first moment that made my skin crawl. Just as the sun disappeared completely and night took over, I had an inexplicable feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't the kind of fear you get from a bump in the night. It was primal, an instinct that screamed at me to do something, anything. But I was frozen. I scanned the area through the rain-blurred windows, seeing nothing but endless desert and the faint outline of rocks in the distance. My rational mind told me it was just my imagination, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. I decided to try to sleep. Maybe if I closed my eyes, I could reset my nerves and ride out the storm. But just as I began to drift off, a flicker of light jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was lightning, but this light was different, sharper, deliberate, and disturbingly human. Flashlights. Not just one, but several, bobbing and weaving erratically in the distance. My breath caught in my throat as I realized they were moving closer, their beams cutting through the rain like searchlights. The second moment of terror came when those lights reached my car. 3 shadowy figures emerged, their movements strange and almost mechanical. They circled the vehicle, their flashlights probing every inch of it, as though they were searching for something, or someone. I stayed perfectly still, my heart thundering in my chest, hoping they wouldn't see me through the rain-streaked windows. Then, without warning, one of them raised a gun and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot tore through the storm, sending a jolt of fear straight through me. Panicking, I made a split-second decision to get out of the car. Grabbing my phone, I scrambled into the night, rain soaking me to the bone as I crouched behind a rock formation a few feet away. My hands trembled as I clutched the phone, trying to steady my breathing. From my hiding spot, I watched as the figures continued their unsettling inspection of my car. Their movements were jerky, almost unnatural, and the way their flashlights darted around seemed less like searching and more like taunting. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights went out. The desert was plunged into total darkness, and for a moment, I dared to hope they were gone, but they weren't. The flashlights reappeared closer this time, their erratic flickering now circling my hiding spot. It felt like a cruel game, as though they knew exactly where I was and were toying with me. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering into the phone about what was happening. The operator assured me help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. Finally, the faint glow of police lights appeared in the distance. The figures froze, then bolted into the night, their flashlights vanishing into the storm. By the time the officer arrived, they were long gone. I tried to explain everything, but his calm demeanor unsettled me even more. "You're not the first," he said, almost casually. "We've had reports like this before, always during storms." "We never catch them." His words hung in the air like a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The officer, in a tone that felt almost too calm for the situation, casually mentioned that over the years there had been other reports eerily similar to mine. Each one had occurred along this very stretch of highway, and always under the cover of violent storms. Some described shadowy figures, others spoke of strange lights in the desert, but no one had ever managed to get a clear look or provide an explanation. "We never found who or what was behind them," he said with a shrug, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. As I drove away, my mind raced, replaying his words. What did he mean by what? Was he implying something beyond the ordinary? The rain had subsided, and the desert was eerily quiet, but the memory of those figures haunted me. I couldn't shake the thought that their actions had been deliberate, calculated, as if they were performing some kind of ritual or marking their territory. Then a darker realization crept in. What if they weren't searching for me at all? What if they had been lying in wait, their strange movements more like a signal than a search? My hands tightened on the steering wheel as my headlights carved through the night. A chilling question echoed in my mind. What if their patience wasn't for me to arrive, but for me to leave? The highway stretched endlessly ahead, but in my rearview mirror, the desert seemed alive, shifting under the pale glow of the moon. I half expected to see those flickering lights again, bouncing across the horizon. For all I knew, they could still be out there waiting for their next opportunity, or their next visitor.
Have you ever driven through a town that felt wrong? Not haunted, not abandoned, but just off. A place where everything looked normal, but something deep inside you screamed that something wasn't quite right. I thought I knew what I was in for, but nothing could have prepared me for the truth. A truth that wouldn't reveal itself until the very end. My name is Sarah, and the story I'm about to tell you is the strangest experience I've ever had. A few months ago, my friend Jessica and I were driving from California to Maine after a visit to some old college friends. We were in good spirits, ready for the open road, snacks, music, and plenty of catching up. But as we continued on our journey, something happened that neither of us will ever forget. It was supposed to be a fun, quick road trip, just the two of us with a playlist and our favourite road snacks. But looking back, it probably would have been smarter to spend one more night with our friends. Instead, we decided to power through the night and drive straight through. By morning, my back was aching, and I suggested we stop for a break. We needed gas and maybe a bite to eat. We drove past a few exits before taking a turn into what was supposed to be a bustling tourist town. The sign promised history, unique shops and charm. But as we entered the town, it didn't feel right. The streets were eerily empty, and the buildings, though seemingly intact, had a worn-down, neglected vibe. It didn't add up. It wasn't abandoned, but it sure felt like it was. Ever been through a town that looks alive but feels abandoned? Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. As if we had stumbled into some kind of limbo, where everything was just a little off. We decided to stop at a convenience store to stretch our legs. Inside, things seemed normal enough, but when Jessica couldn't find her favourite drink, she threw a bit of a fit. I told her we'd find it elsewhere. As I approached the counter to pay, I noticed the cashier. A woman around my age with dark hair and suspenders, a quirky detail I made a mental note of. Nothing strange, nothing to worry about. We stepped across the street and entered another convenience store, expecting a quick stop. But as soon as we walked through the door, an unsettling chill swept over me. It was a strange, inexplicable feeling, like I had just walked into the wrong reality. My stomach dropped, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. There was something wrong, something off about this place. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if the store itself was holding its breath. I turned toward the counter, my eyes searching instinctively, and there she was, the cashier. But it wasn't just any cashier, it was her, the same woman I had just seen at the first store. Same height, same dark brown hair, same features. My heart skipped a beat. This couldn't be real. I stared at her, feeling the blood drain from my face. It wasn't possible. I had seen her just moments ago in a completely different store across the street. I froze, my mind racing, desperately trying to make sense of it. Was I seeing things? Had I imagined the first cashier? Or had something far stranger happened? There was a sense of déjà vu, but also something darker lurking beneath the surface. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her face. It was like I was trapped in some twisted loop, one I didn't know how to escape. My hands were trembling, my pulse hammering in my ears. How could she be here? How could she be the same? I asked her if she had a twin, but she gave me a strange look and insisted she was an only child. Her eyes narrowed, as if I had asked her the most absurd question in the world. I backed out of the store, dragging Jessica with me. She didn't see it, but I knew what I saw. We ran back to the first store, but when we arrived, the woman at the counter was completely different. A short woman with light hair, easily 10 years older than the woman I'd seen earlier. I tried to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I convinced myself that maybe I had imagined the whole thing, but that gut feeling, that awful sense that something had slipped just out of reality, it stayed with me. We left quickly, hoping to get back on the road, but when we stopped for gas, the strangest thing happened. The station was deserted. No cars, no people, just us, the pumps, and an old building. But when we went inside to pay, something changed in an instant. Within seconds, the place was packed. Cars were lined up at every pump, and people seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was like we had walked into the middle of a rush hour. The feeling of being watched, of being trapped, was suffocating. We hurried back to the car, both of us feeling a sense of urgency. We couldn't leave fast enough. But as we pulled back onto the road, something else happened. Something that made my blood run cold. A car passed us, a Toyota Sienna with a massive crack across its windshield. I noticed it instantly, hard to miss. Jessica made a joke about it, and for a second I thought maybe we were just imagining things. But then, 10 minutes later, that same Toyota Sienna passed us again. The same cracked windshield. How could that be? We were driving fast, and there was no way that car could have passed us, not unless it was somehow ahead of us all along. Panic set in. Jessica begged me to speed up, but I was frozen, my mind racing. As I glanced at the GPS, I couldn't believe my eyes. Somehow an hour had passed. We had been on the road for only a few minutes, yet it felt like we had travelled back in time. We kept driving, but the unease lingered, gnawing at us both. By the time we got home, I felt like I had woken up from a strange dream. The whole thing was surreal, too unreal to be true, yet I knew what I had experienced. I've tried to find some explanation, some rational reason for what happened that day, but so far nothing fits. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something else. But I'll never forget that feeling in my gut. The feeling that something was wrong, something that couldn't be explained. And the strange thing is, I found other stories like mine. Others who have experienced similar oddities in places like that. Towns that seem to exist in a different reality, even if only for a moment. So what happened to us? Did we slip into some kind of alternate reality? Or was it something else entirely? But here's the kicker. After all that, I later found out that the town we had passed through didn't even exist. No record of it anywhere. Just a patch of road with no name, no history, no trace. Have you ever experienced something like this? Something you couldn't explain? Let me know in the comments if you've had a similar experience or heard of stories like this one. Maybe we're not the only ones who've crossed into the unknown.